Good afternoon. Let me start another panel discussion. This will be moderated by Mark Horn. Mark, please introduce the panelists.
Thanks, Peter. Before I go to introductions, I'd like to say it's been written that the PMO is the visible, measurable, and above all, improvable manifestation of a company's project environment. Likewise, it's been written that PMOs can be over-obsessive about corporate reporting processes, following the process for the sake of the process, and confusing accountability with reporting of project progress. These quotes tell us first that the PMO is a kind of bellwether for the health of project management at a company, and second, that PMOs can get it wrong. To talk about how PMOs can get it right, I'd like to introduce our panelists. In alphabetical order, Katrien Reinders-Fredericks has more than 15 years of experience in clinical research in several leadership roles within the biotech, pharmaceutical, and CRO industry. As program lead, she oversaw the program strategy and execution of novel immune and CAR-T therapies from bench up to market access. She perfectly understands the specific needs of biotech companies and supports startups and scale-ups with tailored program management. Katrien encourages attendees to make their PMO as lean and results-oriented as possible rather than procedure-oriented. Klemen Spaninger is a pharmaceutical professional with international experience and expertise in global project management and biologics development. He currently heads the project management office for Fresenius Kabi, leading cross-functional global international teams and being responsible for development and implementation of biosimilar development strategies for projects in development, clinical, and commercial stage. Klemen asks attendees to remember that a PMO is much more than just a financial controlling department. In case we don't get to all of your questions, be sure to take advantage of the London PPM Summit's networking opportunities, including its breakout rooms. Let's go to the questions. The Project Management Body of Knowledge, or PMBOK, describes three kinds of PMOs. Supportive PMOs play a consultative role. Controlling PMOs provide support and require compliance. And directive PMOs directly manage projects and supervise project managers. Is one of these approaches most appropriate for life science firms? Any thoughts?
Maybe I go first. So I think that it really depends on the stage or the organization where you are, on the projects as such, and of course also on the very short-term objective that you have on the table. So in my view, we're always sort of transforming from one option to another to the third one. So of course, when we have the very hated budget exercises and latest estimates, we are the financial controllers and trying to provide the overview on the finance. But then when, of course, that is over, you switch to more strategic portfolio orientation. You try to implement certain processes that are needed and are sort of coming as a request from the program leads or program managers and so on. So in my view, you're really going from one to the second to the third. I wouldn't say that it's one specifically, but it's like a chameleon trying to be on all the sides at once.
Thank you. Katrien, would you like to comment?
Yes, I think for me what's important, your question mark was, okay, we can see PMO can be, there can be improvements. So how can it be improved? Indeed, for me, a PMO once, it should not be the group that's sitting in their ivory tower and develops procedures which are most counterproductive rather than supporting the departments. I think a structure should be there to increase efficiency and to enhance the delivery of results. But it's true that my own experience, sometimes it becomes more a bureaucratic compliance need. And then you find yourself in a situation where indeed you're working to comply with the procedures rather than delivering the results. So I find that important indeed that and the solution I don't have handy at hand, but I can see that often the PMO is a separate group. It might be good to get that integrated into the various departments, and sometimes in some companies this may already happen. But in the companies I've known, it was quite a separate group.
Okay, so I think our speakers are saying that a PMO should be fit for purpose. Let's go to question number 2. A poll at a PMO flash mob webinar concluded that getting executive buy-in is the biggest challenge for any PMO. One respondee articulated the challenge as getting senior executives to understand project management processes and the value a PMO can add to an organization. I'd like to ask our panelists, what's the secret to winning executive buy-in?
I mean, that's it's a tough one, and again, it really depends on the organization. If I look the 3 companies that I changed, it's very much depending on how the overall organization is driven. If the organization is very financially driven and financially focused, then actually, in my experience, the executive team is very much relying on PMO, but PMO in sense of really the financial controlling body of the project management, which I personally don't like very much, but it's then I guess the push of the executives, where I see the other side of the coin is where the executive sees PMO also as a strategic arm to deliver the overall vision and the strategy of the company. And we're not talking here again creating multiple work streams or processes or whatsoever, but really trying to help the project managers and project management teams getting their results as fast as possible and lean as possible way. And a lot of times the PMO is then also what I see and what we use sort of a connection point, how to sell certain ideas from the project teams actually also to the executive level, because you can present it in a different way. And again, if the organization is very much a financial or timeline driven, PMO can very much support the PMs in selling their own idea to the executive team. So again, my experience from changing several organizations is that it's really dependent what the overall executive team or the owner, because I worked also for private companies, the owner is driven for, whether it's only finance and only the euros matter, or it's actually a broader picture.
Okay, thank you. Katrine, how did you get executive buy-in?
To me, all companies are cost driven in the way that every company needs to make profits and reach their goals in the most cost efficient way. So to get the hearings of the hearing of the executive, it's important that the PMO can show that effectively, but on a holistic perspective, that resolving incongruent processes or misstructure, by resolving them, that you indeed can become more cost efficient. Of course, I understand that it's sometimes difficult because you know, you have the PMO, you have all the different departments, so there should be that holistic perspective. Otherwise, you get all little solo things. But then also, I think from the quality perspective, there could play a very important role. And I'm thinking now on an own experience that I had with risk mitigations, which are so important. Specifically in pharmaceutical industry, it takes years to develop products, right? So defining the right risks is very important, and I think there the PMO could play a big role to help the teams understanding what is a risk. It's not an issue, it's a risk. How do you define that? Often I find that teams there, they just do it because they need to do it according to the SOP, and that's a shame. So yeah, I think both to convince the executives, I do think showing that the cost of, if you can have a cost efficacy because of the PMO, this always will have the ears. But then also there is a competitive edge where you may support the teams in defining better, you know, the delivery, the risks, and so on. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Panelists, how do you determine the structure of project teams and select the right individuals to be team leaders?
At least in my view, if we're talking about the development programs, yeah, the PMO is not the body selecting actually the program leads or the project managers. So you have this parallel world where you have the PMs, PLs, and then of course the project management office. So from that perspective, at least from experience that I have, we were not the one selecting a project manager or a program lead for a specific program. However, as I still wear a double hat, being a head of PMO and being a program lead, of course, you are trying to understand who are the right people for the right program, especially because we're not a lot of times talking about only development programs, but also some other projects that are happening. And then you're really looking at the individual toolbox and who can actually execute and deliver a specific either a program or an initiative. Yeah, because at least in the PMO, you're more talking about certain initiatives than the actual development programs.
Thank you, Katrine.
So the structure of the project team, it's defined by the setup of your project, your scope. What do you want to do? What's the goal? Is it a clinical trial you're going to define, or is it some process you want to improve? So I think it's important to first, if there is an agreement that the project is needed, to form like a group of sponsors who are more on a senior level and who support the projects, to then define this is the scope with the right departments involved, and then to look, okay, on departmental level or on team level, which people do you need. Indeed, I think it's important that everyone speaks the same language and that there is like a kind of I will not say maybe a training, but at least that everyone understands the methodology and how to work. Ideally, the person that you select, they have a project management background, but this is not always the case. So I think you can learn that.
What are your thoughts, Katrina, on team size? Is there a tension between having a small number that can be effective and a larger number that's inclusive, brings all the needed functions into it?
A team size, again, it depends on the project. I did once a program with 3 projects covering more than 16 countries, but yet the core team was about 8 people. So I think that's manageable. Having a core team of 20 people, that probably would not fly. But I can imagine that you have a core team and then additional people who you want to just keep informed. That's possible. But to me, like, a core team should not be more than maybe 10, 12 people. Otherwise it explodes.
Does that sound right to you, Klemen?
So again, it depends on the scope. If we're looking at the development program overall, so from the global perspective, you at least, based on the stage of the program, wish to have the most important functions represented, meaning that then really, at least from the live stage of the program, the number of people in the core team vary, and then you have anyway the sub-teams. So we are varying between 6 to 10 people, so that really, as I said, based on the milestones that you are achieving, you have the most important functions represented, and not maybe certain functions that are either already past that or are actually coming more into the front stage in the later stage of the program. So you don't want to overburden them, so you really look at the program as the overall to the lifespan, and then you determine who is in your core team and who's then actually in the sub-team level.
Okay, thank you. Another consistently challenging undertaking for PMOs is resource management. Are existing tools and technologies up to the task for managing enterprise resources in 2021? And do you have any advice for PMOs or organizations struggling to manage their resources or to use their resources most efficiently?
Yeah, I think that's the topic of every PMO, and which tools to use. And I saw a very big system being implemented in one of my former companies that at the end became so cumbersome that everybody gave up, and at the end ended up again with Excel tables. In my opinion, I haven't seen a perfect system yet. I know that management is always asking for this, let's say, clarity on resources and so forth. But honestly, I don't have the magic answer or the magic wand. I still, a lot of times, even when I look at my directors in PMO that are actually responsible for resource management, a lot of times we end up with Excel tables. And at least now we have Power BI, so at least you have some tool to better show the results. But I don't think that there's a single only tool that you could say that's the best one. Let's use that one. I haven't seen it till now.
Okay, thank you. Katrine.
I agree with that. I think it's very difficult, and it depends, I guess, as well, if you work in a more bigger company where there's a bit more buffer from backup people who can jump in, than if you work in a biotech where you depend on just a few people. And but yeah, I don't think that there is a perfect system. To me, it makes sense where there's a bottom-up approach, where, because the people the managers of the teams, they are the ones who see the needs the most. But I agree, there is no perfect system, a gap in the market.
Okay, let's take a look at the questions that have come in. Let's see if we have anything here. And we do, from Jacqueline. Is it necessary to collect resource usage by timesheets in order to get an idea of time spent on each work package or project? I'll read that again. Is it necessary to collect resource usage by timesheets in order to get an idea of time spent on each work package or project? So timesheets are not terribly popular in general. Do we need them?
I can see both worlds. On one hand, you can say, yes, let's to track the time. If you are in a repetitive business, like, you know, then indeed it gives the kind of metrics, like how much time you need per activity. But on the other hand, it's it depends so much on what the people are entering. Because let's be fair, I was in a situation where I had to also track every minute, so to speak, but nobody does that. So often you find people just entering the time and then it's not consistent, right? And secondly, yeah, it's only retrospective, and I think retrospective are only predicting if it's really repetitive, kind of predictable work. I've seen, for instance, where the project was rated, like you would rate the level of complexity of projects, and then depending on the level, you would then have more or less time for certain activities. So yeah, you could do that, but my experience is that people don't always comply with that, and that's a bottleneck. Maybe an artificial intelligence program can, you know, in future track that more automatically, let's say, but I don't think we're there yet.
Okay, Klemen, do you require your project managers to complete time sheets?
It's a very difficult question. We are tracking it, but mainly because of development of the database to allow benchmarking to assess how long does it take for you as a company to deliver a certain work package. But there's a big caveat to it, like it was already mentioned, it's very subjective. So you're really relying on the people to insert at least as much as possible accurate data. Again, I'm not very fond of it. If you are a new organization and still trying to assess how much time do you need for certain things, maybe it's a good thing, so that, as I said, you can really do the benchmarking of your activities towards your competitors. However, I think that through the years where you get the experience and so forth, you can have and should have enough knowledge so that you can assess how many FTs or how much effort do you need to insert into a certain activity. Yeah. So, and of course, it also depends on the project to project basis. Yeah. So, like it was mentioned, if it's really something very much repetitive and short term, then probably there's no use. But if we're looking for the development of monoclonal antibody between 7 and 10 years, already if you gain a few months ahead of competitors, it's a lot, and then you need to assess where you can gain that, what's your benchmark and so forth. So then this kind of data is very useful.
Thank you. And I made some notes for myself, but then Mike Myers has commented in the same way as I was going to. I'll read his comment. This is useful as well for monitoring partnerships and truing up promised resource investments. Also, there are tax consequences for verifying R&D for tax refund purposes, at least in the US. Completely agree with you, Mike, on that. And one last question from Rosa. How do you cost projects? How do you cost projects?
So, Mark, did I understand? How do you cost projects?
How do you cost projects? So let's try and think about, go ahead, Katrin.
Yeah. So, well, if you work in a company where there's a lot of data tracked by the PMO and you have that luck, I guess you can then look at the metrics that's there, the data that was collected for each of these individual activities, and then it gives you an indication.
Rosa has added, do you use FTE equivalents to develop your costs?
Yes.
Yeah, of course, you have the direct and indirect costs, and of course, when you're looking at a certain cost, you look at the FTEs, of course.
Yes, the FTEs, the costs for developing, external costs that you need. But if you don't have that, I guess it's yeah, an estimation.
Okay. So we're about out of time. So I'd like to thank you, panelists. Klemen Spaninger from Fresenius Kabi, Katrin Reinders-Fredericks, Program Director, and attendees, I encourage you to interact with our panelists during the networking breaks. Back to you, Peter.
Thank you very much. Now, in a little while, we're going to have another panel, the first 100 days of PMO. Thank you, Katrin. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Klemen.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.